They say history is written by the victors. But what if even the victors lied? What if the stories we grew up believing were never true to begin with? For centuries, textbooks, monuments, and legends have painted a version of the past that feels heroic, clean, and certain. But beneath those polished tales lie twisted truths, half-forgotten betrayals, and outright fabrications. This isn't just about myths. It's about the lies that shaped nations, justified wars, and defined identities. From emperors who were never short to liberators who never freed, these are the stories that fooled the world. In this video, we uncover the top lies of history, and once you hear them, you'll never see the past the same way again. 1. The Trojan Horse was just a gift. The lie that toppled a civilization. There's something haunting about the stories that shape entire civilizations. Pass from lips to parchment to silver screen, they become legend. And few stories have stood the test of time like the tale of the Trojan Horse, a tale of deceit, victory, and the fall of a mighty city. But what if it was all a lie? What if the horse never existed? What if the most famous trick in history was nothing more than a metaphor gone wild, repeated so many times it became indistinguishable from truth? For centuries, school children have been taught that the ancient Greeks, unable to breach the fortified walls of Troy after a decade of war, resorted to a cunning ploy. A hollow wooden horse, filled with elite soldiers, left at Troy's gates. As a supposed gift, the Trojans, blinded by either hubris or wheeled it inside. That night, the Greeks emerged from the belly of the beast, opened the gates for the rest of their army, and slaughtered the city from within. It's a story of treachery and triumph. It's cinematic, it's epic, but it's also likely complete fiction. Let's start with the most glaring red flag. The story comes not from a historian, but a poet, Homer, or rather, his literary descendants. The Iliad, one of the oldest surviving works of Western literature, doesn't even include the horse. That's right, the Iliad ends before Troy falls. The horse appears in later works, like Virgil's Aeneid, written hundreds of years after the supposed events. In other words, the horse enters the canon not as a report, but as mythology. So why did we believe it? The answer lies in the seductive power of storytelling. The Trojan horse is the perfect metaphor, the illusion of peace concealing destruction. It's so elegant, so narratively satisfying, that it demanded to be real. Our brains crave structure, irony, and poetic justice. The Greeks couldn't breach Troy with brute force, so they tricked them with beauty. That's good writing. But history isn't a novel. Let's look at the archaeology. Excavations of the ancient city of Troy, located in modern-day Turkey, reveal a complex, multi-layered site that was rebuilt many times over centuries. The layers dated to around 1200 BCE, the supposed time of the Trojan War, shows signs of fire and destruction. There was clearly a war, or at least a violent event. But there's no wooden horse, no secret passageways, no mention in contemporary Hittite or Egyptian records. What we have instead are charred ruins and political tensions. Historians now believe that what we call the Trojan War was likely a conflict over trade routes and strategic territory between the Mycenaean Greeks and a wealthy Anatolian city. In that context, the story of a single battle, or clever trick, is far less likely than a long campaign of attrition, siege warfare, starvation, and eventual collapse. The horse, in this reading, might have been a siege engine, like a battering ram or a tower, or maybe horse was symbolic, the way modern tanks are sometimes called iron horses. Ancient languages are slippery that way. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some scholars believe the story of the horse may actually have roots in natural disaster. Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea and earthquakes, was also symbolized by horses. If an earthquake attributed to Poseidon destroyed the walls of Troy, the myth of a gift from Poseidon in the form of a horse might be a poetic retelling of that destruction. In this theory, the horse didn't open the gates. The earth itself did. Still, others argue, the tale was retroactively created to make Greek victory look clever rather than brutal. A 10-year siege ending in straightforward massacre lacks the heroic, strategic brilliance that Homer's audience would have admired. The horse turns a bloodbath into a brain game and elevates Greek identity. So what does it mean? Then, if the Trojan horse never existed, it means one of our foundational cultural stories, repeated across generations, dramatized in literature, theater, and film, was born not from history, but from humanity's deepest desire for narrative closure. We want to believe intelligence wins wars. We want to believe there's justice and trickery when brute force fails. And most of all, we want myths that reflect who we think we are, clever, poetic, and destined to win. But the danger of lies like these isn't just in the distortion of the past, it's in how they shape the present. The Trojan horse has become shorthand for any hidden threat. In politics, in war, even in cybersecurity, the metaphor lives on, and it often justifies paranoia. Every refugee, every idea, every outsider could be a Trojan horse. When fiction replaces fact, fear becomes logic. That's the real danger. The lie of the Trojan horse isn't just about a battle. It's about the power of narrative to overwrite memory, to turn war into theater, to transform complex history into bedtime stories for civilizations. And yet, the irony is, even knowing it's likely a myth, we still love it, because the lie is beautiful. And sometimes, that's more dangerous than any sword. So the next time you hear someone reference a Trojan horse, pause. Ask yourself, what are we letting in, and what are we locking out, by mistaking metaphor for truth? 2. Columbus discovered America. The lie that erased a continent. In classrooms across the world, children are taught a simple story. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. It's catchy, it's neat, it fits on a poster above the chalkboard. But beneath that rhyming verse lies one of the most dangerous and enduring lies in world history. Because not only did Columbus not discover America, he wasn't even the first European to reach it. And, more importantly, the land he supposedly found was already inhabited by millions of people, with civilizations older than most of Europe itself. Let's start with the basics. Christopher Columbus never set foot on what we now call the United States. On his first voyage, he landed in the Bahamas, then explored parts of Cuba and Hispaniola. Over 4 separate journeys, he explored parts of Central America and South America, but never reached North America proper. So how did he earn the title of discoverer of a land he never even saw? The answer lies in myth-making. Deliberate, calculated myth-making. Columbus wasn't seen as a hero in his own time. He died in 1506, largely forgotten and disgraced, stripped of the titles and wealth he was promised. But centuries later, in the 18th and 19th centuries, American nationalists were searching for a founding legend, one free from ties to Britain or France. Columbus, with his voyages under the Spanish flag, became a convenient blank slate. He was transformed from a flawed, greedy explorer into a symbol of progress and divine destiny. Monuments were raised, cities were named after him, and a new version of history was born, one that conveniently ignored those who came before him and the devastation he brought with him. Because the real history is far more complex and far more brutal. Let's rewind even further. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, Norse explorer Leif Erikson sailed from Greenland and reached what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Around the year 1000 AD, archaeological sites at L'Anse aux Meadows proved that Vikings established temporary settlements there. They were likely driven away by harsh weather and conflict with the indigenous people. But they made it and left behind physical evidence. Columbus did not. And if we want to talk about discovery in any true sense, we can't ignore the fact that millions of indigenous people already lived in the Americas, long before Europeans dreamed of setting sail. The Aztec, Inca, Maya, Mississippians, Iroquois, and countless other cultures had thriving cities, trade networks, and complex systems of government. Some cities in Mesoamerica had populations rivaling European capitals. These weren't isolated tribes in the wilderness. They were nations. So what exactly did Columbus discover? Gold, slaves, and the cruel potential of colonization. On his very first voyage, when he arrived in the Caribbean, Columbus described the native people as kind, generous, and peaceful. He also noted how easy they would be to enslave. Within decades, their population had been decimated by disease, forced labor, and genocide. Columbus himself implemented brutal policies. He forced natives to bring him gold under threat of death. Those who failed had their hands cut off. He started the transatlantic slave trade, capturing and shipping indigenous people back to Europe in chains. And yet, for centuries, Columbus was held up as a beacon of courage and curiosity. Why? Because the lie served a purpose. It justified colonialism. If the land was discovered, it could be claimed. If the people were savages, they could be conquered. If the explorer was a hero, then the conquest wasn't theft. It was destiny. It was manifest destiny. The narrative allowed generations of settlers to believe they were civilizing an empty continent, rather than invading ancient homelands. Even the holiday, Columbus Day, was born out of political manipulation. In the late 1800s, Italian-Americans faced fierce discrimination in the United States. To gain acceptance, leaders pushed for a national celebration of their most famous countrymen. In 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made it a federal holiday. But even then, the story was sanitized. The bloodshed was scrubbed. The truth was buried under parades and paper hats. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. Today, a growing number of people recognize Indigenous Peoples Day instead. They acknowledge that history isn't just written by the victors. It's often written by those who benefit from forgetting. And in that forgetting, we erase not only the victims of history, but their descendants, people who still live with the consequences of Columbus's arrival. This isn't just a matter of correcting a schoolbook error. It's about reckoning with the origins of a continent's power structures. Columbus didn't discover America. He helped unleash a wave of violence, disease, and displacement that killed tens of millions and erased countless cultures. And the lie of his discovery continues to shape the way we view the world. It's seen in how we still talk about land as if it can be claimed by planting a flag. It's seen in how we frame colonization as exploration. And it's seen in how we celebrate myth over memory, comfort over truth. The story of Columbus is not a tale of bravery. It's a tale of mythology, weaponized for empire. So the next time you hear someone recite that familiar rhyme, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Remember what it leaves out? The people who are already here, the lives that were lost, and the lie that was told to make it all seem noble. 3. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake," the lie that lit a revolution. It's one of the most infamous quotes in history. A queen, dripping in luxury, responds to the cries of starving peasants, not with compassion, but with contempt. Let them eat cake. 4 words. That's all it took to turn Marie Antoinette into the face of aristocratic cruelty, a symbol of the arrogant elite blind to the suffering of the masses. But what if she never said it? What if this moment, etched into textbooks, echoed in protests, and painted across revolutionary banners, was a complete fabrication? To understand the truth, we must first look at the woman behind the myth. Marie Antoinette was born in 1755 in Vienna, the youngest daughter of the powerful Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. At just 14 years old, she was married off to the future King of France, Louis XVI, as part of a political alliance. She was a teenager thrust into the heart of the French monarchy, expected to charm the court, secure an heir, and navigate the treacherous waters of Versailles. But almost from the moment she arrived, she was hated. Why? Because she was Austrian, the traditional enemy of France, because she was young and fashionable, and because she didn't behave the way a queen was expected to. She partied, she danced, she gambled. She built a fantasy village in the gardens of Versailles and played at being a shepherdess, while the economy crumbled. To the starving masses, she was a villain in silk, and the media of the time made sure that image stuck. In the 18th century, pamphlets were the social media of the age, anonymous, viral, and vicious. They accused Marie Antoinette of everything from sexual deviance to treason. Her every action was exaggerated, twisted, or fabricated entirely. She became a blank canvas onto which an angry nation projected its rage. And in this storm of hatred, the infamous quote was born. But here's the thing, Marie Antoinette never said it. There is no record of her uttering those words. Not in her letters, not in court records, not even in the vast troves of libelous pamphlets. The phrase actually predates her by decades. It appears in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's autobiographical work, Confessions, written in the 1760s. When Marie Antoinette was still a child, Rousseau attributes the quote to a great princess, but doesn't name her. Historians believe it may have been a general expression used to mock the obliviousness of royalty, not a specific quote from a specific queen. So how did the myth stick? Because it was too perfect to ignore. In revolutionary France, people were starving. The harvests had failed, the price of bread had skyrocketed, and the monarchy appeared indifferent at best, hostile at worst. The people didn't need facts, they needed symbols. And Marie Antoinette was the perfect scapegoat. She represented the very idea of excess. Her elaborate hairstyles, her expensive dresses, her parties at Versailles, all of it seemed to mock the poverty just outside the palace walls. So when someone claimed she said, "Let them eat cake," no one questioned it. They wanted it to be true. The phrase became propaganda, repeated in speeches, scrawled on posters, whispered in the streets. And over time, it hardened into historical fact. It didn't matter that the woman behind the image was more complicated, that she funded charities, adopted poor children, and tried in her final years to protect her crumbling nation. The myth had already devoured the reality, and that myth had consequences. On October 5, 1789, thousands of women marched from Paris to Versailles, furious about the price of bread. They demanded the king and queen return to Paris, and they got their wish. The royal family was marched back under guard, prisoners of the people. 3 years later, the monarchy was abolished. Louis was executed, and in 1793, Marie Antoinette followed. Her trial was a sham, filled with lies and baseless accusations. But she wasn't killed for crimes. She was killed for what she symbolized. And part of that symbol, a huge part, was that infamous quote. So what does it mean, then, that one of the most defining phrases of the French Revolution is a lie? It means history is not just written by the victors, it's shaped by stories, by rumors, by propaganda, and by the human tendency to simplify complex truths into bite-sized morality tales. Marie Antoinette didn't say let them eat cake, but she became the woman who would, because history needed her to be. And this matters, because the lie isn't just about the past. It's about how we process injustice in the present. When the powerful are blind to suffering, when wealth mocks hunger, when luxury ignores desperation, we look for villains, and often, we find them not in facts, but in narratives, in symbols, in scapegoats. Marie Antoinette became the perfect cautionary tale, the rich woman who danced while the world burned. But the danger is, when we reduce people to symbols, we risk repeating the same mistake, ignoring the systems and structures that allow inequality to thrive in the first place. Marie Antoinette didn't cause the French Revolution. She didn't invent inequality. She didn't eat cake while others starved. But the lie made her unforgettable. And in doing so, it taught the world a dangerous lesson. that a good story can outlive the truth. So the next time someone quotes, "Let them eat cake," remember, the lie was not just in the words. It was in what we needed them to mean. For Napoleon was short, the lie that belittled an empire. For more than 2 centuries, one of history's most iconic figures has been reduced to a punchline. Napoleon Bonaparte, the brilliant general and emperor of France, remembered less for his military genius and more for his supposed small stature. We call it Napoleon complex, the stereotype that short men overcompensate with aggression and ambition. But here's the twist. Napoleon wasn't short. He was actually of average height for his time. So how did one of the most powerful men in European history become history's most enduring short joke? Let's begin with the man himself. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica. By the time he was in his 20s, he had risen through the ranks of the French military during the Revolution, commanding armies with speed, precision, and ruthless ambition. He crowned himself emperor in 1804 and led France into a series of wars that would reshape the entire European continent. His victories were legendary, his losses devastating, his legacy complicated. But somewhere along the way, the legend of Napoleon's height became one of the most widespread and stubborn myths in the world. So where did it come from? Much of the confusion starts with a number, 5 feet 2 inches. That was Napoleon's reported height at the time of his death, but it came from French medical records. Using French feet, which are longer than British feet, when converted properly, his actual height was around 5 feet 6 or 7 inches, perfectly average for a European man in the early 1800s. But the British press wasn't interested in nuance. At the time, Britain and France were mortal enemies, locked in war after war, and British cartoonists, journalists, and satirists found a goldmine in portraying Napoleon as a tiny tyrant, a little bony, as they mockingly called him. They exaggerated his size in political cartoons, drawing him as a childlike figure throwing tantrums while towering generals tried to rein him in. The image stuck. It was propaganda. After all, Napoleon's very existence was terrifying to the ruling monarchies of Europe. He was a self-made man who had risen from modest roots to challenge kings and emperors. He overthrew centuries of aristocratic tradition. Portraying him as small wasn't just an insult to his body, it was a psychological weapon. It minimized his achievements. It mocked his ambition. It made him seem ridiculous instead of revolutionary. And the public bought it. Even after his exile and eventual death in 1821, the caricature lived on. It was easier to remember Napoleon as a mad little man with big dreams than as a complex and deeply influential leader. The short man syndrome narrative became shorthand for any man who dared to defy convention or grab too much power. And Napoleon was forever branded by a body that never actually existed. But let's talk about why this matters. Because this isn't just a historical correction. It's a reminder of how easy it is to rewrite reality with repetition, ridicule, and rumor. Napoleon wasn't the first, and he won't be the last, to have his legacy warped by the narratives of his enemies. The lie about his height wasn't just a joke. It was part of a broader effort to discredit his ideas, his reforms, and his revolution. Napoleon wasn't a saint. He crowned himself emperor. He reinstated slavery in French colonies. His wars led to the deaths of millions. But he also revolutionized military strategy, reformed legal systems with the Napoleonic Code, and challenged the old world order in ways that still echo today. To reduce all of that to a height joke is to flatten a mountain into a molehill. And yet, the myth persists, because it's convenient. It lets us laugh at power. It gives us permission to believe that greatness must come with compensation. It supports our cultural tendency to mock rather than understand, and worst of all, it shows how a lie, repeated long enough, becomes indistinguishable from truth, even if it's right there on the record, measured and recorded. Today, Napoleon complex is used casually, even clinically, to explain male behavior. But what if the very phrase is based on nothing more than enemy propaganda? What if we've built an entire psychological stereotype on a British political cartoon? The damage isn't just to Napoleon, it's to history itself. When we let myths override evidence, we lose the richness of truth. We trade complexity for simplicity, and we allow our biases, whether national, personal, or political, to color our view of the past. Napoleon was many things: brilliant, brutal, ambitious, flawed, but short. That's the one thing he probably wasn't. So the next time you hear someone crack a Napoleon joke, pause. Consider where that joke came from and who it served. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about what we choose to remember and what we choose to distort.